Welcome back to the Rewind That Tape YouTube channel. Today we are back with another episode of Contenders or Pretenders. Last week we predicted that Colorado was a pretender and they would not survive the next 2 weeks. Sure enough, the Buffs got smoked by Oregon on the road. Meanwhile, Penn State dominated in their whiteout game against Iowa, and now the hype is surrounding James Franklin's team. So, are Penn State contenders or pretenders? Let's rewind that tape to find out. Let's start on the offensive side of things. The biggest question for me is whether this offense is good enough to keep up with the more potent offensive teams. Now, what I mean by that is when the game's a shootout, can Penn State's offense win the battle? The defense isn't always going to be able to hold up. Sometimes it's going to have to be an offensive game, and Penn State will have to find a way to win. They got tested against a tough Iowa defense, and there's plenty of hope for this team. The previous games before Iowa dented my overall confidence in this team, but looking at them play on Saturday, I feel a lot more confident and comfortable with the Penn State offense. So far this year, they've gone with the dual running back of Kaytron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, who have both had over 50 touches and both have over 200 yards. This strategy seems to be working, but I wonder what happens when Penn State can't control the ball and they need to throw the ball. But we'll get to that later. Let's look at the stats. They have put up over 30 points in each of their games, but two of them were to low-life teams in Delaware and Illinois. The two big wins they have are against West Virginia and recent win against Iowa, which I think are pretty respectable considering the other schedules we've seen around the league. Keandre Lambert Smith is the lead receiver, but outside of him, there's no real receiver threats, which is going to be a big problem for this Penn State team. This brings us to Drew Allar, who hasn't been forced to use his arm in any of Penn State's wins so far. He's thrown for over 215 yards only once in the first game against West Virginia. This brings up the question of whether he has enough to be a top tier QB, as we discussed in the Colorado episode. If you're going to be a playoff team, you're going to need a top tier QB. So let's take a look at Aller. To be honest, after watching the film and making sure that this team has what it needs to have to be on this episode, Aller just isn't the reliable threat on offense. They don't really use him as much as they use their running backs, is what I mean by that. In big games down the stretch, this is going to be a reversed role situation. Drew Allar is going to have to be good, and overall, he's looked pretty good, but he doesn't have much big play ability. He tends to throw the ball shorter, which is a smart brand of football. But what is going to happen when he needs to throw the ball down the field? I keep emphasizing that because that's what seems to be the problem here on the offensive side. When they play better teams, he's going to have to get the ball out, and it cannot be these short passes that we see from the Penn State offense. He had 25 completions versus Iowa and over 30 attempts, and he didn't have over 200 yards of passing yards. That seems to be a red flag for this team, but Iowa does have a very good defense, which they won't face until they play Ohio State. And then they'll have to face another good defense in Michigan. Those are concerns for me. What are they going to do when they're put in 2-minute situations or they somehow find themselves down 2 scores? This could be potential issues for Penn State. Now let's switch gears to the defensive side of things. Penn State's defense was nothing short of exceptional in the game against Iowa. They achieved a historic shutout, holding the Hawkeyes to a mere 76 total yards, a Big Ten low for Iowa, against a Penn State defense. So that's props for the Penn State defense already. They have defensive coordinator Manny Diaz employed innovative strategies using multiple defensive ends and versatile formations that flustered Iowa quarterback Cade McNamara. When you look at advanced stats, Iowa's offensive success rate was a meager 18%. That dominant performance solidifies Penn State's defense as one of the best in college football, which is extremely important when taking a look at their overall playoff chances. The Lions have a dominant brand of defense that has showed through the first 4 games. They've limited their opponent every single game, and it seems like the defense controls the entire game. They're able to make turnovers. They check every single box for me. Now, when I compare them to the likes of Ohio State and Notre Dame, who proved that their defense can play against good offenses, which I think both of those teams have, Penn State just can't mark the box yet because they haven't played somebody to that dominant capability as Notre Dame and Ohio State have. Should they be one of the best? Yes. When will they prove it? I think they're going to do that against Ohio State when they shut that offense down. If they can prove it against that team, all of a sudden they are going to be one of the best defenses in college football. Speaking of that Ohio State game, what is the remaining strength of schedule? Is it doable? We asked that question with Colorado, and we ultimately came to the conclusion that it was not doable. But what does it stand for Penn State? Well, things start to get interesting with their 2 ranked matchups left on the calendar. Both of them are against the 2 big brothers of the Big Ten, Ohio State and Michigan, who are both top 5 teams right now and definitely the most significant issue left on the schedule. It's going to be a challenging task to get through either one. OSU and Michigan both bolster some of the best defenses in college football and also carry a decent offense as well. I'm more concerned with the Penn State offense taking on the Ohio State defense, and the same goes for the Michigan game. These are both teams that we've seen their defense prove that they can hang on. And if the Penn State offense falters against one of these offenses, which I'm looking at the Michigan matchup more as a game that could go the wrong way for the Penn State defense. If that happens, Penn State's offense is going to have to march down the field against Michigan's defense. Same thing goes for Ohio State, but I expect the OSU game to be much lower scoring based off of the OSU's offense. The lack of downfield threat without multiple receiving threats makes you wonder whether Penn State can keep up if they get down. I think ultimately one of these games are going to be a loss, but it's just not a knockout punch, which keeps Penn State's hopes alive. They can go 1-1 against these teams, and if the other teams do the same, anyone can take the division. It's going to go to some sort of tiebreaker, and hopefully, if Penn State's fortunate, somebody else in the Big Ten will knock down both of these teams, which would give them the leg up and bring them to the Big Ten championship, where they should be able to get through and eventually into the college football playoff. The only other matchup that I see on the schedule that's potentially dangerous is Maryland. But before I get into that, let me just say, let's just see how long Maryland is able to stay undefeated. Overall, Penn State's shutout victory against Iowa showcased their potential as a playoff contender. But is it enough as they take on the treacherous schedule? I mean, who else in college football will play 2 top 5 teams this year? No one. If Penn State can somehow win both of those games, which I don't think is quite that impossible considering how good their defense is, they can shut down both of these offenses with a good game. It's up to the offense to just put some points on the board, which I think they are capable of. Penn State could potentially run this table and knock off 2 top 5 teams. That means that they would get into the playoffs even if they lost the Big Ten championship at that point. The real question is if they get down in either one of those games, can the offense make up for it, which I'm still not sure. Their midseason games, including one against OSU, is going to be a crucial test for this team. Based off recent performances, Penn State has a legitimate shot at making the playoff push. Therefore, the Nittany Lions are definitely contenders. Primarily, we give them the stamp because of their stingy defense, but the offense has potential as well. We'll see if the team develops as the season goes on, and we'll see what happens in this chaotic football season. But for now, That's all we got today on the Rewind That Tape YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure to check out our social medias, and we'll see you guys on the next one.